Thank you for joining us today, RTE 2021. I'm excited to kick off our next panel discussion on real-time future of audience engagement. Our session will be moderated by Tony Wang. Tony is our co-founder of Agora.io and now heads up emerging markets for Agora. Also, we invite you to add your questions. Please find the questions tab to the right of the screen and we'll try to get to them at the end of the sessions. Tony, it's great to have you here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone. So my name is Tony Wang, as Joe mentioned, handles some of the emerging markets, new technology, right? I'm here with two of the honored speakers. One of them is Geremie. Geremie is the Chief Creative Officer of LivePlay Mobile, and I'll let him speak more about himself. The other one is Karl, a co-founder of live streaming app Taboom, based in Brazil. And I believe that's probably the first one in Brazil, right? Made by local and built by Brazil for the Brazilian people, right? So Geremie, why don't you go ahead for a quick intro of yourself?
Sure, thanks, Tony. So Creative Officer of LivePlay Mobile, we operate a product called LivePlay Bingo, which is a 24-hour-a-day live streaming gaming platform. It's hosted 7 days a week, 24 hours a day by 30 different hosts around the world. And it's essentially social casino with live dealer and braiding into it a bunch of different game shows and real world rewards across the platform. Prior to LivePlay Mobile, I was at Sony Pictures Television, working on a bunch of the big game shows like Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and sort of at the intersection between the syndicated shows and mobile gaming. And prior to that, I was at Paramount Pictures for 10 years, started distributing movies around the world, and then ended up running games and apps for them before I went to Sony.
Thank you, Geremie. Karl?
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Tony. So my name is Karl Loriega. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Taboom. As Tony mentioned, we are a live streaming platform based in Brazil. Basically, our value proposition is that we're bringing together creators and artists together with super fans. So it's a distinction I'll draw it a little bit later. But we're definitely focusing on smaller niche creators with fans who are just completely rabid about them. Prior to Taboom, I was head of digital for ABS-CBN Corporation. That's the dominant media company in the Philippines. So while there, I headed up their OTT service globally, as well as a variety of their the different new media ventures. As you can imagine, there's lots of Filipinos all over the world, so we were managing a bunch of projects there. Prior to ABS-CBN, I headed up business development in Africa for iFlix. iFlix is a global OTT player, Netflix challenger. Did that for a little over a year. And before that, I was in Brazil for about 13, 14 years. A couple of things. One, I actually started up the first OTT service there way back in 2006, complete Netflix copy. Completely too early. So the OTT and premium video bug bit me early on. So thanks.
Yep, thank you, Karl. So I think the reason we are here is actually both of you represent some very interesting background, right? Emerging markets and developed markets, OTT and streaming and interactive streaming, that's where we both headed, right? So I think one of the key questions, there's a lot to be talked about over here, but that's one key question is, how do you make money out of it, right? That's basically one key question. A lot of companies fail, not because of production quality, not because of lack of creativity. As a matter of fact, everybody I know in this field has tons of ideas. Like every Los Angeles is a screenwriter. They have a play in the back pocket want to sell you, right? So the key thing I want to focus on for this session is really like, how do you monetize on the audience side, right? What are the ways, as a future of the media player can think of? And I think both of you represent something very interesting, right? So going back, I remember my younger days, the Friendster was just started, right? And then you go to MySpace, then you go to Facebook. All of those, internet is basically driven by the advertisement, right? By the back-end data broker, the privacy data retargeting, all those, right? So two things happens right now. One is Apple just released this, and all the government just released all those new regulations. This thing even tighter. Now you can only monetize on the first-hand data right now, right? So that's one. Number two, well, we're talking about a mix of unscripted content and script content, UGC versus mixed with PUGC. Like, there's really no clear definition. Like, what is UGC, right? Does Elon Musk went on Clubhouse count as UGC or PGC, right? So it's very hard to see. I think the line is blurring. However, your Nielsen rating is still there. Like, it's very hard for old economics to selling the current new media type, which is those interactive media type. So in this, we saw a lot has moved over to the audience transaction. Tipping is the first one, and then during the COVID, subscription like fans only, all those getting very popular. Live commerce start to picking up, right? And then Geremie, you guys innovated with a game in it, right? So you can pay to play the game with the host, right? So we want to talk more about that side of it, right? So this is basically the background and what we see. So my first question was really, do you guys think this shift of fusion of unscripted UGC content with like linear and PGC content mixed together and delivered over non-traditional TV, other than TV, you're talking about your tablet, talking about your mobile phone, predominantly your mobile phone. Do you think this is just a fade during the COVID, or do you absolutely think this is the future of where we are moving into?
I mean, I think for me, it's a collision of a few different worlds that's inevitable, at least in unscripted. And what we're trying to do is really ambitious, meaning braid together three sort of massive categories of entertainment, both the creative components of those categories, but also the economics of those categories. And the best analogy I had was working on a show or with a show like Wheel of Fortune, where it's this sort of linear entertainment juggernaut, 30-year billion-dollar brand that is basically a media business. And if you want to increase the revenue, you have to increase the ratings. But then we would build free-to-play transactional mobile games that would make a lot of money on very few of the audience members playing, so very transactional. And then when we would take talent around the world, the need for the audience to interact and be recognized by that talent, no one ever charged people to talk to Vanna White, but I bet you could make a lot of money if you did, right? And so those three worlds of linear entertainment that's a media business and ad-supported, coming together with free-to-play sort of whale-driven economy that's transactional, and on top of that, this new streaming recognition economy. We're trying to braid those three together, but we started with the business model. So we took social casino, which is a very lucrative business model when you get it right, in the US, $7 billion business. And we added the streaming linear TV entertainment component on top of it. We did that 24 hours a day, unlike the early successes in terms of engagement, like HQ Trivia and a lot of those games, even some stuff that I did with like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You can get tons of engagement, but for a very short period of time. We're streaming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, on top of a business model that has worked for over a decade. And on top of that, we're adding in this recognition economy, which is, the ability to be connected to talent that you like and that you want to continually recognize. So creatively, you're braiding together three things that I think are coming together anyway, at least for unscripted. I don't think for scripted lean back dramas, comedies, that's not the future, but for unscripted game shows, competition, music, anything in the unscripted world, I joke that as a business in Hollywood, we've spent the last 20 years making games and interactive experiences and marketing them to TV and film audiences. I now think the next 20 years is going to be about taking entertainment experiences and putting them into gaming audiences, because that's where all the quote unquote money is, where all the energy is, where all the younger audience is going. And that's basically, we flipped everything upside down and started, this is where Agora and a couple of years ago, it coming together with Unity and allowing, the people who can make games and iterate on business models and do things really well from a revenue standpoint, adding the Agora SDK on top of that, and then being able to program entertainment on top of, a fast iterative game platform, made all the difference. And I think everything up till that was always challenged by the fact that you couldn't iterate fast enough. You could make one hit show like HQ, but you couldn't make 10 more quickly and keep iterating through. So I absolutely believe those three worlds, at least for unscripted, are coming together, and you're basically taking a $60 billion category on top of a $40 billion category and braiding it together with this, streamer economy, and who knows how big that will be. So it's really exciting.
Yeah. So if I hear correctly, I think basically we're talking about the underlayer shift is the breaking the traditional TV screen barrier, because the TV screen is one way, there's no unaddressable, right? Now with the mobile screen, you break that, and because that barrier is being taken out, you bring in the real time, and you can add in gamification mechanism, the fusion of the gamification and all those into it, and also in the meantime, it lower down your production costs, while in the meantime it increased your stickiness, because when you add gamification, you add social connection into the audience. I mean, there is no social network in the audience in a TV show, right? You don't know each other, you can't talk to each other. There is no reason why you should go back together next time. But with the gaming, with all those things, there will be, oh, Geremie is on, I'm going to come here, right? So there's also a social recognition connection. So the social graph is being added towards the audience. The interaction is being added between the audience and the content, which enables the emotion engagement. So you believe this is just the beginning of the future trend. Having said that, I think that's actually pretty true. Agora has added our SDK into Unity, right? I mean, 10 years ago, if you ask this about, this is just making no sense. Like, why do you adding a video SDK into Unity, right? Well, we added because that fusion is happening, right? Game is not a computer game. Game is a content. You view Unity as your storyteller creator tool, right? Or your gamified machine. It's a creator tool, basically. So adding those two things together and put this into the device of the future, which is your mobile phone, that makes absolutely sense. So, Karl, what do you think?
Well, that's there's certainly a lot of elements that go into trying to figure out exactly where the path is, where people are going, where the business in the future will be. I'll put it into the context of kind of like how we started Taboom, and sort of like the initial inspiration for that. In the past two positions that I described, as I said, a digital for ABS CBN, and then head of business development for iFlix, working for a big traditional media company, or in the case of iFlix, a challenger company, work with these big media companies. The business model essentially is, when it comes down to my end of things, is that, well, we've just made a huge capital investment in producing, high production value content. Now we need to monetize it. We've spent millions upon millions of dollars, producing this content. And there's two principal ways that media companies monetize. One is via advertising, and the other is via subscriptions. So essentially, you've got this big capital spend. You're like, okay, now how do I kind of like distribute this content to these different channels so I can make the most amount of money? So you get into concepts like windowing content, et cetera, et cetera. But essentially, at the end of the day, you've got two different types of audiences. One, you've got a really, really large number, like you said, of audiences that no one really knows each other. There's no social graph. There's nothing. It's just this big, giant attention market. And then you're selling, cents per person, per view, et cetera, whether it's CPM, whether it's, however you figure it out for broadcast TV audiences. On the subscription side, you've got a lot of really high value users, subscribers. However, it's extremely hard to get new subscribers, and it's extremely expensive to get new subscribers. But they're really high value. You're trying to keep them as long as you want, because they're paying, relatively high, probably relatively high payment per month, and all you want them to do is to stay on there. So you better have like a really, really huge fountain of content that generates just huge amounts every single month. Because what we've seen, especially in emerging markets, is that people will subscribe to a service for a month, binge watch for a month, and then drop off, and then wait another few months, and then jump back in. So it's not the behavior that you would see in more more developed markets where people have higher purchasing power, and it's like they forget about it, right? It's a minimal spend. But in emerging markets, that's a big spend. So you've got these two types of behaviors, right? So you're really trying to scratch your head, like where can we monetize? This content is really valuable, people love it, but we're not seeing that return in a monetary fashion. So when we started looking into it, while I was at ABS, and unfortunately Roland isn't here because actually this experience came from working with Kumu, was that, we've got this great, amazing legacy content and formats and artists and script writers, et cetera, et cetera. We're not managing it, we're not monetizing it efficiently. It looks like there's this promising thing called real-time engagement that's out there. Let's see it. And once we started experimenting with a few formats, we started seeing that on a per user basis the revenue that we were seeing was multiple times higher than it would be for broadcast. And we would get multiple times higher number of users than we would get for a typical subscription service. So, the way we were looking at it was that we were able to kind of capture, this wide range of value that people place in this content. There's a small group of people that are willing to pay a high amount of money, relatively, per month to be able to watch a lot of this content, no ads, premium experience, ultra high definition on TV, etc. You've got a whole bunch of people that doesn't make sense, but there's really no middle alternative. So either they're watching it in a pirated fashion, or they're waiting for it. They save up their money for 6 months, binge everything for 6 months, and then drop off the face of the earth for another 6 months. But there is a huge, kind of a middle ground there that of users that want a little bit more premium experience, but aren't willing to pay for the the premium price, and are willing to accept other ways of monetization. In the beginning, that led us to sort of like, how can we be more creative on the advertising side? But that was also kind of a dead end. We then started learning a lot about, like you were talking about, Tony, the audience interactions is part of the content. People really enjoy it when, they're watching certain types of content in a social fashion. And that in itself becomes part of the premium experience. So premium experience is no longer, for a lot of these users, just being able to watch it without ads, right? It's like you're just taking away a pain point. It's like, ads suck, so I'm willing to pay a price to be able to avoid ads. Now what we started seeing was that actually being able to watch it and having the tools to be able to interact in really cool ways with other people in the audience, that in itself is a lot better experience than an ad-free experience. And with the different types of monetization available, with tipping, with sort of the interactions, then you can capture sort of the value that you're delivering from that really, really cool experience. And going back to what you were saying earlier, is it a young person thing? Is it an old person thing? I think all folks really, really enjoy it. You just have different kind of like learning curves, right? Some of the older people, they're probably not as used to the different ways that people can interact. It takes them a little bit longer to get into it, but once they're into it, they're really, really into it. So once we started seeing that, saying, hey, there's a gap here, and we started doing some very, very successful campaigns on Kumu, with the premium media company. And sort of like that experience starting up Taboom in Brazil. Brazil is similar to the Philippines in the sense that, very, very high social media engagement, lots of time spent online. Actually, it has a much higher digital banking penetration than the Philippines. But in Brazil, now the big difference was I no longer had like this big giant catalog of premium content to take advantage of. We were like trying to start off essentially from ground zero. So the gap that we saw with Taboom, at least in the beginning, which is what we're working on now, is that on the one extreme you've got pure UGC. So you've got just tons of people just live streaming random stuff, cat videos, etc. And then you have like kind of the premium content on the other extreme. So how we're kind of like attacking the market is we're trying to get into the middle of creators that aren't monetizing well, but have lots of potential to do so, in the sense that their content isn't extremely, isn't for like millions of people, isn't like a large audience type of content, but it's valuable to a smaller group of people. They're super fans or people that would like to learn from them. So that's kind of like where we're inserting ourselves, where there is a recognized value to that content, whether it's instructional, whether it's, as Geremie was saying, it's the interaction. So essentially a live interaction is a very scarce commodity, right? It's exclusive, it's scarce, it's happening right now, it's not going to happen again. So those are the certain types of things that we're monetizing. and we're exploring it with a wide variety of creators now in a wide variety of genres, and then we're seeing kind of like the different genres where that is really effective, and we're focusing on those for the next few months.
Good. Yes, you actually mentioned something that's very interesting. I think because our audience coming from the global, right? There is a big distinct difference between the U.S. audience subscribe and forget. I have so many accounts monthly just hit me, right, and they follow you. Even after I change credit cards 5 times, they still follow you, right? Right. So there's no way you shake it off. But I think in emerging market, this is a little bit different, which means your task is much harder. And it's much harder to find the quality people. So I guess that is your strategy of focusing on the mid-tier, under-recognized but yet potential super talents, right? And then bring them in front of stage and let them have their small niche group, right, of fans, right? Like what we said about is building the connection between them and their fans, right? So I remember there's an old saying. And from an old friend, Todd, said, media is a message. Well, he didn't say that. He just bring me into that message. A medium is a message, which I think is actually kind of true. Do you guys thinking the real-time interactive video format is a new medium? Or it's just a gimmick on top of the current medium, like the traditional video? Like, what do you think?
Geremie, let's take first crack at that.
Again, I think the way we've looked at it is that we're starting with games as the foundation. And, as every successful game publisher knows, there's something called live operations, which powers most of the engagement and revenue in these games that are free to play and games as a service. And so we've just, it's cliche, but we've just put the live into live ops, basically. So managing or providing events and new content to your audience on an hourly, daily, weekly basis is how these massive free-to-play games do so well, the ones that do well. And we've essentially just made what has traditionally been a content thing process for big game companies. We've put real-time engagement and 24 hours of live host, at the forefront of our live operation. So it's really, I think it is, at least for games that like social casino, where if you were to, go to Vegas and play bingo or slots or roulette, it's hosted. That physical event is hosted by a live person. It makes total sense then if you were to do it from a social standpoint in a game, it can be totally organic for that to be hosted and have real-time live engagement. All of those activities in the real world are live. And the same way that game shows, even if you're watching Jeopardy, there's still this notion in the living room of screaming out the answer live. We're just essentially taking what happens in a massive Las Vegas casino, where all the money is made with certain activities on the floor, the casino activities that generate most of the P&L, but then you add these entertainment experiences on top of it. So if you're bored playing poker at a casino or you're bored playing a card game, you can go see a show, or you could go unwind and do some leisure entertainment. We've taken that model and basically digitize that, and you create this world where there is a business model underneath that's tried and true, and it's a $7 billion existing model in the US, and we're just adding live entertainment and live operations to that, but it's literally 24/7, 7 days a week. So for us, it's integral. It's not a fad. It's the core of the experience.
So that is the new medium, basically. Because I remember when I first met you, you are produced in the studio, fancy studio, and then it was in your garage, and then it was basically distributed in multiple people's garage, right? So you keep bringing down the production cost, and as some people.
The garage for everyone's that was one of those COVID necessities. We were actually producing Who Wants to Be a Millionaire live for ABC and Sony, and we were on a fancy studio in Culver City, and it was the weekend when COVID shut everything down. And so the choice was not to do the show, and we were going to give away $2 million over the course of 8 weeks, or move the production part of it to my garage. And we opted to move it to my garage. But we quickly figured out that you could do a lot with a little, and that was the basis for a lot of the stuff we're doing now.
So let me ask a question. Does the audience ever complaining like, oh no, Geremie, you insulted my eyes. Now you produce in garage with OBS green room versus a $10 million equipment. Does any of your audience complain?
Not specifically, no, obviously. Yeah. I mean, it is aimed at mobile, and I think it's more about the interactivity and the emotions that you elicit than necessarily it being super high production value. We're constantly trying to raise the bar on the quality of the way it looks and feels, but at the end of the day, we're all in the chemistry business, right? We're all in the business of creating emotions, and
yes,
what I love about what we're trying to figure out, and again, nobody's fully figured it out yet, but in my career, starting in film and TV and those iconic game shows, they elicit a certain set of emotions predictably, reliably. And then, but they're different. It's fantasy and drama and conflict versus games, which elicit progression to mastery and a sense of accomplishment and these other emotions. And then you have this new medium, which is the recognition economy, with being able to be, seen and heard and real-time interaction with talent that you care about. Those are 3 palettes of emotions that are amazing. And we want to braid those together because they inherently have 3 different business models. We don't know what the right chemistry mix is, but we think the future of unscripted is some mix of those 3 worlds. In 5 years, the mix might be totally different than the way we have it right now, but it's really about managing those emotions and less about necessarily the production value.
Yes, I think you know something interesting is the interactivity is a new medium, right? That brings the emotion engagement, which goes back to our main topic is how do you monetize with the audience, right? So Karl, I think I want to have a question for you. I noticed multiple times that both of you mentioned that the show have to be 24/7. It's live, right? Compared to traditional show, it's always like, oh, it's 5 to 6 p.m. every day, and that's already pretty good daily show, right? But I noticed the new way is actually 24/7 nonstop. How important is that?
24/7, granted, we at Taboom, we're not at that point yet because we just don't have the amount of content to be able to fill 24/7. What we're seeing is, at least with the approach that we have of, very specific, artists, very specific creators calling their audience, it's not as important because, these are kind of like a little bit more geared towards scheduled viewing. But however, as we fill out the content catalog, more and more, we see that, we'll start becoming a destination. So for example, we look a lot, I've worked with Kumu, we look up to them. They're a bit more advanced than we are in terms of just size and the number of creators, the number of audiences and everything else. So they've become a 24/7 destination. It's something where, hey, I want to, kind of like a TikTok where I want to spend, an hour, 45 minutes. There's probably something interesting there, that I can go check out. So eventually, I think we will head to that point. We don't have, that many aspirations. We're probably like at least 12 months behind that. So right now we're really looking at sort of like, programmed slots. So depending on the type of, business that, let's say you're trying to build, it could be more or less important. In our case, it's not as important. And I just kind of actually want to go back to your previous question of, whether, we see it as a, this real-time engagement, whether it's a new medium, it's a fad, et cetera. It's certainly not a fad. I think it's fairly obvious to most everyone in the business that it's not a fad. It's not going away. It's evolving. And going back to Geremie's answers, found it really interesting because we've experimented with a couple of formats. One, which is similar to what Geremie has done, which was, let's take a format that's really worked in real life, and because we're all stuck at home, let's make it possible online. Let's make it interactive, possible online. And that specifically was MC battles. So one of the categories that we're really focusing on is music. So there's a lot of these like rap battles, MC battles that happen everywhere. In Brazil, happens all over the world. So we said, we talked to a bunch of MCs, talked to a bunch of rappers, that pretty high audiences in Brazil. Say, hey, you guys are missing out on this. We've got the tools to make that happen. Your fans can vote. They can vote real time. There's a lot of really cool interactions that happen on screen. They can come in and out. They can talk to you, etc. So we did that. It was very successful. They loved it. People loved it. But that was also just something like, hey, we can do something online that's not possible to do physically today. But when it does, start happening again in venues, we can still put in, we can basically draw in audiences for entire country, because previously, when they would hold a specific event, obviously it would be geographically limited to people that can actually go to that event and no one else can participate. One of the big benefits is that, it's technically open to everyone in the world. So they've got audiences from everywhere. So that was one of the types of content that we did that was, super successful for us in terms of engagement, in terms of audiences, etc. One thing which we just launched last week, it's a bit more taking advantage really of kind of like the collaboration tools, the new collaboration tools that we've launched. So essentially we're bringing together 10 different artists, and there are going to be 5 collaborations. So 10 up and coming artists that have never worked with each other. They're going to create original music together with the producer that's been assigned to them over the course of 2 months. And so that entire creative process will be captured online. The audiences will come in and vote and give their opinions on what the theme should be, on the lyrics, on the music, on the beat, et cetera, et cetera. So the audience themselves get really, really involved in the entire creative process. It's not, at least the way that we projected it, but we're kind of seeing a difference now. When we originally projected it, we said, hey, this is a show for music fanatics, right? This is for super fans that really get really nerdy about the types of equipment that are being used, like the BPM, is it just 1 or 2 BPM difference, make an entire, song sound completely different, et cetera. So it's very, very detailed collaboration. Fortunately, we're seeing a lot of casual fans just come in as well and just enjoy the whole creative process. But that for me is a very different animal from something that you would normally show on TV, which is, kind of a passive experience, and just or something that would happen in a venue. Then you would want to take it online because the venue's closed. That is a completely different engagement that's happening with many different people from all parts of the country, from all different walks of life, interacting with these artists to create something original at the end of it. So that shows for me that this is a completely different medium, right? The types of monetization that can be woven into this are very, very different. So we've woven in monetization into the integration itself. So votes will cost money, just symbolic amounts, but they will. Interactions, exclusive interactions will be monetized, etc. And then we will have the EP released, and that will also be monetized into different platforms. So that for me is once again, you put that in front of somebody in the traditional media world and say, hey, monetize this. They probably would just monetize a small percentage of that. It'll be hey, I'll make it either as a premium content behind a paywall, or I'll make it for free and see how many eyeballs I can get on it and charge for advertising. Both ways, I think, would be extremely disappointing. That's the kind of content that you really have to be there, watch it happen as it goes along, and be part of the story, as opposed to kind of catching it at the end, saying, hey, record all of that, make it part of a VOD package, and I'll watch it. It won't be anywhere near as fun as being part of it on a day-to-day basis.
No, I totally agree with you. I think the monetization capabilities, the difference between those two is almost like a national park that you do premium content, you're selling tickets, right? Oh, versus church. You go to Sunday church, it's free to entry, and you got emotional engaged, and then bam, here you start donating, right? I think the difference is proven for thousands of years of human history. The difference has been proven, right? So one of the other quick question I think is also our audience asked this question, like what kind of, now with interactivity, what kind of gamification actually works, right? So Karl, you mentioned, for Geremie, you basically put the game into the video stream, right? And so people can play. Karl, you're talking about some of the action is the pay to play action. What other gamification you guys see that works for you guys?
For to your point, Tony, we've essentially taken, again, starting with the game, we're building social casino game mechanics that have worked for decades. Everyone knows how to play bingo or roulette or slots. And so those are almost perfected at this point. So it's, the first rule is just don't break that. The second rule is add layers on top of that, again, if you look at it as the 3 emotional canvases, the first canvas is very well known, and it has been for decades, on how to get people engaged into those types of games. We're adding another couple layers. I think the most interesting one is this recognition layer, and people paying more to be seen or to get recognized by the talent in real time or even offline, right? So, from a VOD standpoint. So like we're introducing cameo type features into it. So if you don't get the host attention because there's too many people in the room at that time, you can pay later to get a custom message from the host. So this whole, and I think COVID did supercharge that, where people were so isolated and essentially just not being seen or heard or understood in many cases, where they gravitate to some of these worlds where, by definition, you're being seen, and just by playing, I mean, it's not all about making money. It's about, people playing, and through the course of just playing the game, they are being seen, recognized, commented on by a real person who's, encouraging them and interjecting all this positivity into their life. We get it's sad, but we get all of these messages from people who, have had a really tough year, and they're sitting, and recovering from an injury or and with COVID, everyone was so isolated and sometimes forced to be isolated that they would log in for hours and just be part of a community, and the host would talk to them throughout the day, and then on top of that, you can gamify things where, if it's really busy that day and you want to get a message through, well, there's a virtual economy for that, and you can be guaranteed. It's like this guaranteed. You can gamify things, where you can guarantee positive attention, which is relatively new. And really exciting, and it creates, again, another emotional canvas to play with, but also another economic canvas, which I think we're just scratching the surface of right now.
I think one of the things in the American is people just want things right now, right? So I think that instant guaranteed gratification, attention, is positive attention, is probably very important, versus if it's a TV show, you have to meet until the next fan club meeting, which is next month, to get some of the recognition, right? At least here, you click that button. By the way, the Apple Pay is connected right there, right? And you immediately get acknowledged and positive attention reinforcement you received, right? So in certain ways, we're almost like being trained by those gamification mechanisms, right? And then the more you've been trained, the more open the wallet, right? And we've been seeing those cases in the whole Southeast Asia, in the China, like this basically, and then in the United States, this is basically human behavior. Well, a lot of time people thinking, this is popular in Asia because they're all kids with a mobile phone. No, it's human behavior. And the same, like you guys point out, it's same with senior people too. We have some senior startups, apps that targeting the senior people community. They are even more lonely. Like, how often do you call your mom, right? So they're even more lonely, right, basically. And that's what basically, I think it's all about. Yeah. So Karl, do you have anything to add on that interactive gamification?
Yeah, we've got a couple. One very similar to what you were just talking about, what Geremie was just talking about. Essentially pay to stand out. So we've experimented with various types of content. One of the ones that has been actually really, really successful for us, and it's not something we're focusing on, but it's happening. So clearly, we're not going to stop it. Is content on pets. So we've got a couple of really popular dog behaviorists that are on Taboom, and they go on there, and the chat is like, you can barely read it. It's going so fast, right? A lot of people have different questions and everything else. So we're in the midst right now because we're hacking it. They're like, how do I get my question answered? Clearly there's value to that. So, and that's actually something that's happening in the real world, right? Like these pet behaviors, they do charge for one-on-one sessions, for group sessions, etc. So one thing that we're implementing very soon natively is being able to essentially pay to have your question sort of like put in there in the premium list. And that's not something new. I mean, I think Twitch has something similar, and a couple of other platforms do have something similar. But we saw it right away. Like, it wasn't something that we thought would be interesting, so we did not put it in our version 0. But we're seeing the demand for it. Just from looking at some of our more popular creators. The other one that I find like really interesting is kind of like you said, playing on these like age-old human emotions. Once you start making connections, there's something that you want to influence it one way or the other, connect in one way or the other. So we've done a mini version, and I actually did as part of ABS-CBN a much larger version with Kumu, which is a talent show, right? The talent show of trying basically to find like the next recording artist, and the prize was a little bit of money, but a recording contract, essentially potential successful career in music. So very similar to The Voice, very similar to America's Got Talent, etc. But what we then found, and it was almost completely unscripted. The only things that were scripted were the actual days when people would perform, but everything else in the middle was just like, we were so new, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. Like, okay, we don't really have anything planned. Let's just see what happens. So what happened was the contestants would, on their own, kind of like let people into their lives, right? To create empathy. It was like, here's myself. Here's me rehearsing. Here's me practicing. Trying to get the best song and creating that connection with people. And those people are then become like connected, become really big fans of that person, and they want that person to succeed. And so where the gamification and monetization comes in is that when it comes time to vote, and each vote is like a couple of cents, they would go in and they would vote like 100 times because they really want their person to succeed, and because they created that connection. And we didn't anticipate that. What we were anticipating was that the competition itself would be exciting enough. You've got one person performing, another person performing. Who do you think is better? Go for it. What we then found out was that the emotional component of it was really strong. And then the funny story is, and this is back in the Kumu days, when we first did this, that emotional component was so strong that the person who was the most talented actually didn't win. So the person that created the most empathy won, and that kind of created an issue because we were like, well, this person, it really isn't that good, to have like a career, most likely. So for the next version, we then inserted what we should have inserted from the beginning, and this came from our lack of experience with these types of campaigns, was that there needs to be like a judge, or a panel of judges that would come in and also put in just like the music technique and actual, performance, like objective performance, or the most that you can, objective points to kind of feed into this, because the winner does get, a lucrative contract and does get pushed and does get promoted, et cetera. So, I think in terms of gamification monetization, there's really nothing, I think in summary, there really is nothing that we're creating that's like a new emotion. It's just the technological tools are there that we're able to capture things that have always been a part of kind of like human life, right? You want to be close to somebody that you admire. You want to be able to influence a certain action. You want to appear, you want status, you want recognition, you want interaction, et cetera. And these tools capture that, much, much better than obviously traditional media, which didn't have it at all.
Yeah, good. So, as halfway into a session, I do have a question. So we all think this is not a fate and this will come forward. We all agree that the audience transaction is going to be the future of monetization of those new medium type. But what is moving forward? Like if the startup, what is the most important thing to nail down? Because you have limited attention. Is this technology? Is this building the creator economics, the ecosystem, or is this getting more premium content? Like what is or maybe none of above, like what is the most important things in you guys' view, as you develop your startup moving forward in this trend?
Well, for us, it was the business model, right? I mean, when I was at Sony, HQ came out, and it was essentially, the HQ Trivia, which, at one point had 2 million concurrent viewers, and that's better ratings than a lot of game shows at the on network TV. And, and to watch that wane in success because the business model didn't support it was really disappointing, because everyone was rooting for this new way to engage and create new content. And then, on the back of HQ, I think Tony, you probably powered 40 of them, but there were, probably 100 clones in that space. And again, everyone started with the show and the engagement, but didn't get the business model right. And I think, obviously we all want to create amazing, lightning in a bottle and be on the Super Bowl and all that fun stuff. But if it doesn't sustain itself economically, just like any content, that commercial versus creative balance, we really came back to let's figure out the business model first and then start layering in all of these new forms of creating the emotions. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's business model, then engagement, and then pushing the envelope on hopefully creating, where people funny, where you braid together these worlds that nobody has really seen in one place, right? Like or a lot of people have watched a game show that they love and have played the same format. Like, again, I go back to Wheel of Fortune. Millions of people watch that show every week. The same millions of people, or many of them, go and it's watching someone spin the wheel, solve a puzzle. Then, some portion of those people go play the various Wheel of Fortune games out there that have made tons and tons of money over the years. It's the same format, different set of emotions, though, because when you watch it versus when you play it, it's different. And, for us, it's how do you take the best of those business models first and then start to pull in the different emotions that those three medias traditionally have created into one place.
I tend to agree with that. My answer is creator community, but what does that mean? That means the business model must be sustainable for them, because at least in Taboom's business model, we make money when the creator does. So it's we're not making money off advertising, we're not making money off other things. It's all part of that. The engagement is where we make our money, and that's where the creator also makes money. So when speaking with a couple of hundred creators that we've spoken to, that tends to be the primary topic of conversation. The creator for us is what creates the content. So when you say, for example, premium content, what does that mean these days? Premium content, I think, for a lot of people these days just means the content with high production value. That costs a lot of money to produce and probably costs a lot of money to license. However, that tended to equate with content that's just high quality. These, with the new tools, with the new technology, we're seeing lots of high quality. When I say quality, it's content that's super engaging. That has some standards. Obviously, it's not just going to be like shock content or anything like that, but is engaging lots of people, and it's really well thought out. It may not be created by an army of scriptwriters and everything else, but there's some folks out there that are creating really, really amazing content on extremely low budgets. So for us, the content and creators for our platform anyway, in Taboom, that's one and the same, right? And kind of like we're going into forays into getting premium content. When I say premium, like licensed content, is because a lot of our audiences, are also big fans of that type of content. So what we're trying to do is create new experiences around that licensed content. So we're using it sort of as the basis for creating this other layer on top of it that makes it something completely different. You can watch that same content somewhere else, and it's not going to be the same. So we're looking into, for example, live sports. Watching live sports in a bar versus watching live sports at home versus watching live sports on a real-time engagement platform or three very different things. So that's really cool for us, but really it all boils down to the creators that we have on board, and the reason that we would have them on board is because the economics work. So really working out, how to build a sustainable business that we are able to pay creators, more than they would on alternative platforms is key. So right now, those alternative platforms are primarily run or are primarily monetized via advertising. So it benefits a certain type of creator that has huge audiences. And so we're seeing probably a temporary thing where there's a lot of really cool creators with really cool content that are doing a lot of things for free. So opportunity cost for us is almost zero, and we're saying, hey, do it here because you can make some money. Over there, you'll make zero money. So it's, we're seeing this window of opportunity where we can get these creators on board, get them making more and more money so that essentially they build businesses around, their creativity and their content.
Yeah, I think in all those cases, like your audience is almost like one of the audience point out. She also runs the app down in the source. The audience almost expect to be part of the scene, right? I mean, if you can't just leave them on the bench anymore. They need to be part of, whether it's a game, whether it's a HQ trivia show, whether it's whatever is MQ battle. They need to be part of it. right? And that's the reason they're going to pay you, right? So our job is really take that, and I mean, it's really similar to an offline event. I mean, if imagine a sports bar when your audience cannot speak, they're not going to make too much money out of it, right? They need to speak. That's the reason they come to the sports bar in the first place, right? So having said that, one of the questions, I think this is for Geremie, like what kind of interactive game show you think would work best, or games? In that.
Well, look, I mean, I think the holy grail that the tech is starting to get there, but from a creative standpoint, nobody's really nailed yet. Karl was talking about music and the voice and those sort of things. And if you look at take two extremes of entertainment, 5 years ago, you had, HQ with 2 million people playing every night. The stakes for that game, for that experience, for the player, for the person at home, were very high and well known, right? You could win $100,000 if you won the show. However, if you were just watching that on TV, it'd be very boring. There was nothing particularly interesting about watching HQ Trivia just as a standalone game unless you were playing for the stakes that you were playing. So that's one extreme. Now take The Voice, or one of those shows where the stakes for the people on the show are very high and well known, which makes it interesting to watch. But at home, the most you can maybe do is vote, right? And you really don't, there's a lag, you really don't feel that direct connection. I think the holy grail is figuring out entertainment that the stakes for the people on the show are very high and well known, and the stakes for the people at home are very high and well known, and the interaction between the two is very connected, so that what the audience does at home impacts the people on the show, and therefore it's interesting to watch, and what the people on the show do on the show affect the people at home playing or interacting, and therefore it's even more interesting to interact with. That to me is the holy grail. That's what we're trying to figure out. The tech has prevented that up till now between broadcast media and games, but again, it's converging, and I think people who get that right, they sort of get the Jeopardy experience in a way where you have 30 million people a week screaming at the television, and that it's been interesting to watch for 30 years, but if you really combined the stakes for both the people at home and the audience together, you have something even, that's exponentially more interesting and probably more lucrative. So it's an exciting time because both the gaming tech, the streaming tech, the broadcast tech is now getting to the place where I think we just need the right creators to think about it in the right way. And it's going to get really special really fast, which is exciting.
Correct. I think you mentioned actually some of the key elements of the Agora's value proposition, right? I mean, the name of Agora means people gathering together and talk, right? Except in this case, it's people from anywhere in the world, right? Any device gathering together, talk in large scale. You mentioned about 2 million, right? So this is exact, and they felt in the same room with no latency, with no out of sync, right? So globally, right? So this is where the hard problem we're trying. So it's some shameless plug over here. But I think one of the audience is very interested with your background. Is that your home studio or your?
Oh no, this is one of my studios in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And this is where you produce your show right now, correct?
Yeah, we have 3 different green screen studios where we produce all the shows. Yep, 24 hours a day. Well, we are mostly from here, and then we have about 8 hours a day we broadcast from London just because of the time difference.
Yeah. Okay. So we have just time for one question from the audience. So if you have any question you're watching this show, do let us know. We'll address that. In the meantime, I have one question. This is relevant from another audience. As we all know, in the United States, the sports betting is opening up. I mean, other than legal, this is exactly the same thing. Right. I mean, other than legal, take a legal portion out. This is exactly the same as what we discussed. Right. So, do you see any good examples of those kind of the things we talked being applied in the sports betting world? I mean, have you ever? I mean, I know you Geremie, what you're doing is a live casino, right? Basically just online. Have you ever think about like maybe a sports betting player in your app?
I'll punt that one to Karl. I have not spent a lot of time on the sports side of it. Although if you look at all the M&A activity in the U.S. between, the big the sports betting startups and the iGaming, behemoths in the real world, obviously all the smart money is moving in that direction because that's where all the heat is in terms of M&A activity. So it probably doesn't make sense to add it into the product we have because it is more around leisure entertainment and casino activities. But I'll punt to Karl for his background on it.
Yeah, we've had initial discussions on it, and we've, like I said, the big component is the legal aspect. Right now in Brazil, it's kind of like in a gray area. It's officially legal, but Brazilian companies aren't allowed to operate it. It's some weird thing where essentially it's legal, but it's inoperable. So at the end of the day, you can't do it. But it is something that's very interesting to us, and I think it attacks that question that Geremie presented really well, which was, how do you create high stakes for both the audience as well as the players? Betting is clearly one of the ways that you can do that, very clearly, and something that people have done and are doing around the world. So it's a very recognizable format. So sports is also one of our categories that we're going to be investing into it. So we've looked into it. It is something that we'll probably partner with somebody in the beginning once the legal situation is cleared up. But we want to study that really closely because we do want to incorporate elements of it, at least on some of the different types of content that we have.
Yes. Good. So the audience, if you have more questions, we actually, Agora most likely will do another specific session just on iGaming and sports betting. We do have some interesting use case to share. And, I can tell the audience myself, I saw some of the virtual horse racing and it was making as much money as you do. And they basically put it on crypto. So now your odds and bets is all statistics is actually very fair, right? One of the biggest problems is people thinking you might jinx the odds, right? And the horse always wins, right? Crypto, every single thing is, it's very open. You can run the whole log, right? And then it became very interesting. So it's a virtual horse racing, right? Without horse actually getting died in the end of the day, got injured, right? So, I know every region has those similar things. So one key thing over here is now your audience is no longer in one room or in one arena. So you want to think about, make sure the score, the deliver, the feed, the video feed, everything is totally in sync. And you want to bring everything we just talked about into the scene, right? The production value, the recognition, social recognition, right? The interactiveness. You bring everything because in the end of the day, it's no difference. It's no difference than a game of computer game, right? Esports, right? It's all the same, right? It's just like legal. I mean, in my view, it's mostly a legal issue, right? I mean, your tipping is okay, but your betting is not okay, right? So, I mean, purely a legal issue, right? So, anyway, we are at 11 o'clock, so we're going to wrap it up. Agora has a lot other very interesting session going on. We have another one, 1 p.m. on my end. So you're more than welcome to stay tuned and continue sending us the questions. If you have questions not being answered, we'll be very happy to address those. All right. Thank you, guys. I'm giving back to Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Tony, Karl, and Geremie. That was very informative, and thanks for sharing your experiences. And again, thanks to the audience for joining us today. Please be sure to check out the next session. We have a very exciting one on the future of broadcasting and OTT. And don't forget, there is a very hot Entertainment at Noon Pacific Time by Harry Mack, a live performance. And so enjoy the rest of RTE 2021 today and tomorrow. Bye now.
Thank you.